I'm with Peter Bayer, who is a journalist, an academic, and a lecturer. Thank you, Peter, for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
If I can just ask you, how did you get into journalism?
Comedy, what I did was I emerged from school as a pretty poor student, I have to say. Took a year and went hitching through Europe. I was a roadie for a rock band, which is ideal, training for a journalist. When I came back, I'd always wanted to be a journalist. You know, the written word and the immediacy of news was something that I'd lived with for kind of most of my teens and post-teens. And I ended up joining the Pretoria News as what was known as a cadet reporter. Today they're known as interns. Spent some time there as a reporter, was then sent across to a Johannesburg newspaper called The World, where I worked as a sub-editor. Then wrote a freelance article for South Africa's then leading magazine called Scope. That's back in the days where it was a good magazine, not the thing that it eventually became. And they accepted it, published it, and then offered me a position. I then moved through to Durban, was a senior feature writer in magazines for 8 years. My dream was always to work for a newspaper called the Rand Daily Mail, which kind of any student who's 90 years old and that sort of age group will know as being in its pomp one of the top 3 newspapers in the world, and I got headhunted by them and worked for them for 8 years up until the day that it was closed down by the previous government. So pretty much that's how I started, and then ended up publishing newspapers, educational newspapers through Africa, and then decided I wanted to teach, and actually became an academic as well. I do postgrad degrees for a hobby now, completing a master's, and next year I hope to be doing a PhD in journalism. So that was the kickoff.
So now the journalism industry has obviously changed from the time you entered the job market. Can you talk to us a bit about these changes?
Sure. Look, if you take it from the 70s up until now, of course, obviously the main thing is technology. Technology has changed massively. Don't forget, television only came to South Africa in 1975. So up until then, people read newspapers, read magazines, listened to the radio, which was SABC. If you now fast forward, we've got 9,000 television stations, radio stations, newspapers, but the most critical thing that has changed has been the speed to press. So the old days, in the olden days, you know, when I was young and your age, you know, we would be writing stories and there'd be 2 editions of a newspaper or 3 editions, and it would appear the next day. And SABC television, when it was here, would spend an entire day preparing a 15-minute news bulletin, obviously because the government of the day went kind of snipping through it and took out anything that was anti-government. Now, of course, you know, you pick up your cell phone and you've got media, you SMS news, you've got mobile, you've got you can take photographs, you can do Twitter, Facebook, you've got such instant news. I mean, even things like, for example, blogging. You know, I would hate to think that young journalists think that or students think that blogging is journalism. As David Bullard said, he referred to bloggers as the air guitarists of journalism, and he's absolutely correct. Some of the good journalists will do blogs and get it out there very, very quickly. But the most important thing is, and you'll see it over the years, what has happened is that media has become more and more compressed time-wise, and speed to press, whether it's radio or television or print, has become the most critical aspect. So that's the biggest change. And of course, when South Africa was democratized, we had this wonderful period of having one of the freest presses in the world. And of course, sadly now that seems to be heading back the other way. So the more things change, the more they stay the same.
In terms of challenges, the challenges have obviously changed from the time you entered the job market to now. What do you think are the major challenges that face journalists today?
That's a very good question. The most important thing is the size of the market, the job market, is shrinking exponentially. And perhaps we'll talk a little bit later on about the concept of integrated journalism, which is what most journalism students need to get their heads around. But there is the biggest challenges facing. Number one is the availability of jobs in specific media. In other words, back in my day, I would kind of dream of working for a specific newspaper based on, I don't know, political perspective, a style of writing, whatever. And then, I would kind of aim for that. Today, of course, you've got a number of schools of journalism. You've got Wits and Rhodes, you've got VC, and you've got some of the others, some of the other tertiaries. I have to tell you, between Wits, Rhodes, and VC you'll find the best schools of journalism. But again, we'll address that a little bit later on. The biggest challenge, I think, facing young journalism students now is number one. It seems like almost a phobia about reading. The gathering of information becomes very, very scrappy. And the other thing that they need to realize is that journalism is not just a job. Journalism is a profession. We are a profession because we have rules, we have regulations, we are self-regulating. If we get it wrong, we get punished in exactly the same way as doctors and lawyers and accountants get hauled before their necessary boards if they make an error. So too do journalists. You know what they say is that doctors bury their mistakes and lawyers hang their mistakes, and journalists actually have their mistakes out there in broad print. So it's that attention to detail and the knowledge base of what is going on in the world around them, those that are challenges to all but the best journalism students.
You've obviously had a very profound career. If you can take us through a few of the highlights that you've experienced.
Lots and lots and lots of highlights. It goes from being part of hijacking a hijacked yacht from Frelimo in the mid-70s through to I was nominated for an SFW award. That's an award that was given to journalists back in the day. It was a bust on municipal ambulance services, which I'm very pleased to say led to the then Minister of Health in the old government being shuffled out of the cabinet. That was followed by another bust on the then Minister of Posts and Telecommunications, and I got an exclusive over there. So every time, in fact, you see a story with a byline, there it is. And the important thing, of course, the best of the lot was, as a member of the Rand Daily Mail staff, I'm the holder of the Pringle Award, which is the highest award given to South African journalists. Such was the esteem in which the Mail was held that when it was closed down, all the journalists were deemed to be Pringle Prize holders. But the biggest thrill of the lot is actually seeing graduated students' bylines appearing and hearing a student who is or a past student who's now director of news at ETV, and another one who's a senior crime reporter and sub-editors, and just the way that they proceed. So my byline was one thing, and the awards which I've won, apart from industry awards, is the biggest reward is seeing students out there getting into things like Avusa's internship program. We've got, and this is where Varsity College is doing so well. We have, up until a couple of years ago, the people who got into the Avusa and independent groups internship programs were pretty much limited to Rhodes journalism students and Wits University students, journalism students. So I'm talking here not about just a BJur, I'm talking about honours and master students. Now, 2 years ago, we got a girl called Pearl Boshamani, who was the first VC student accepted into the Avusa internship, followed last year by Bianca Nkomo, also got into Avusa, followed by immediately Roxanne Tungwane, who was the first VC or Advotech brand student accepted into the independent group. Plus, we've got others who've gone from a diploma, journalism diploma, a youngster called Billy Rivers, who was accepted right into Wits University honours in creative writing. So That's where the thrill is the achievement. I've done my bit, they're doing theirs now.
So when we talk about the IIE students, what do you think makes an IIE graduate from other students entering the journalism
I'll tell you
sector?
exactly what it was, and this is not thumb sucking, and it's not a figment of my imagination. When you hear a news editor of a top daily newspaper who phones you and says the reason we love VC students doing the internships, not talking about when they've graduated, doing the internships, the reason we love them is because we don't have to teach them anything. They arrive ready to do the job of a journalist. It's like little wind-up dolls. They go out there, they arrive at the newspaper, and you go, and off they go and they do their job, right? And they go out and they do the crime reporting. Last year, when they had the whole furore over the Protection of Information Act, I opened the Star, and on the front page was a picture showing a former journalism student, Yolandi Dupree. This is in the Star. She's in Pretoria. And then I turned the page of the Star, and again, bearing in mind Star is Johannesburg paper, and lo and behold, the page 2 lead was written by 2 VC Pretoria journalism students, Eddie Delshare, who incidentally, I have to tell you, came to study journalism at Varsity College Pretoria from France. Not just from another part of the country like Springs, but actually came here from France. Before that, we had a kid called Scott Patterson, who came here from Scotland to study journalism at VC. So Eddie's byline was there, and Bianca and Corma's byline were there in national newspaper coverage of a global event, which was this Protection of Information Act, this bill proposed by government. So yeah, there we go. So that's the kind of success that Varsity College journalism students are having. Is you simply put them out there and they can immediately do the job.
Now, to be a good journalist, you obviously need to have key traits and characteristics. Yeah. Can you give us 3 of those characteristics that you think a good journalist needs to possess? In any
specific order. Number 1, they have to have a passion for the news. They have to want to know what is going on in the world around them. People who don't care about Julius Malema being hoofed out, and they don't care about 7 boys raping a mentally deficient girl, and they don't care about Barack Obama potentially losing an election, and they don't care about Chernobyl, those people are not going to become journalists. They may be people who write stuff, but that's not what a journalist is. So number 1, there has to be this passion for finding out what is going on. Secondly, they have to have a code of ethics that is absolutely unquestionable. Journalism is, as the fourth estate, in other words, we are the people who keep an eye on government, on so on and so forth. We are the watchdogs for the public. So ethically, we as journalists cannot allow ourselves to slip. If it's kind of, yeah, well, give me 10 rand and I won't write the story, it's like a traffic cop taking a bribe. So ethics is absolutely without question. And the final one, and this is where it becomes so important, they've got to have, should I just answer that again? Right. Finally, the third and most important one is they have got to have writing skills. You know, people can be interested in the news and they can have ethics, but if they don't have writing skills, you can't be a journalist. It's like saying if you want to be a doctor, but you faint at the sight of blood, you can't become a doctor. Journalism is a writing job, above all. So those are the 3.
And do you think that they should practice their writing skills?
Have to. They have to read. They have to read the styles. They have to read the quality of other journalists. They have to follow everything that is written and said. I don't care if they're watching Al Jazeera or ETV. I don't care if they're reading The Sun or The Citizen or The Star or the Pretoria News or the Cape Times or whatever. As long as they are following the news, and they've got to see how it's done, and they've got to practice and write and write and write. Hone their skills.